Got a tanto, I should say first. I'm going to turn it around out of my way, and should you feel the need to cheer or boo, we'll get the full effect of that, but no throwing of fruit, please. So I want to start off today. What I want to do is I want to start by asking a question. My question here is how much? How much sheep feces would make 5,500 people ill? Are we talking about a cupful? Are we talking about a bucketful? Are we talking about a wheelbarrow load or a truckload? How much sheep feces would make that many people ill? Well, you can do a simple little equation or two and get yourself an idea about that. And the first thing you need to do, and I'll just apologise now, maths was never my strong point, and I've done a few calculations here. But the first thing you've got to do is figure out what sort of effective dose for Campylobacter. And it depends actually on the species of Campylobacter we're talking about. For example, you can find Campylobacter with geckos, and that particular strain of Campylobacter doesn't make humans ill at all, apparently. Other species are very virulent, and as few as 10 organisms will cause an illness. So I looked at the literature here, and the sort of decent, reasonable point I came up with was about 50. So 50 Campylobacter bacteria will make someone ill. And in the case of Havelock North, the evidence we've got and the work that was done suggests it was a pretty virulent strain of Campylobacter. So we've got our 50 organisms there. Let's choose 50. We'll times it by 5,500, and that means we need 275,000 bacteria. 275,000 individual bacteria. Now, the problem with that is, of course, is that all of the drinking water and the water supply is not consumed. It's used for all sorts of other things. And so, if we say, take a fudge factor and say, well, only 1% of the water, the drinking water supply is going to get drunk. So we times it by 100, and we come out with a figure here that we need 27,500,000 bacteria, single organisms, to make 5,500 people ill. So that's 27.5 million bacteria. So we've got those. The next question is, how much sheep feces do you need to have that many bacteria? Well, it's pretty simple. I looked at the research, and more or less we come up with a figure of 500,000 Campylobacter organisms in 1 gram of feces. So you get the rest of it, you do the little equation, and the startling fact of this is you come up with a figure of 55 grams. So 55 grams of sheep feces, that's about an egg cup full, can make 5,500 people ill. It's kind of staggering when you think about it. So you look at that and you think about the implications of what that might mean. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that at Havelock North an egg cup full of sheep feces got tipped into the river and suddenly 5,500 people got ill. That's not what I'm saying, because there's a whole bunch of other factors here. For example, some people will consume less than 50 organisms and they'll still get ill. And some people, greedy people, they'll consume more than their share of 50. So there's a bunch of fudge factors going on there. But the point I make is a very simple one, and that is a very, very small amount of animal feces can make a large number of people ill. And there's two reasons, a number of reasons, but two of the main ones are, firstly, the number of organisms in 1 gram of feces that are pathogenic is very high, and the second is that water supply systems are extraordinarily efficient at transmitting pathogens to people. In fact, if you wanted to make a whole lot of people sick with Campylobacter, you couldn't come up with a better way than designing a water supply system. It's so efficient. And the great thing about water supply systems is their ability to take clean water and give it to people. It's also the Achilles heel, because if that water's not clean, your problem can be quite large. So that's my first question. My second question is also how much? And this question is, how much sheep and cattle feces is out there? Well, as it turns out, 1 cow produces as much feces as 16 people, 1 sheep as much as 10 people. And if you add up all the cows, and there's different figures used for this, and there's different ways of fudging around it, but you come up with a figure that says the amount of feces produced by our cattle and our sheep and our cows is equivalent to nearly 500,000 people. Sorry, 500 million people. I told you I wasn't good at math. 500 million people. So, that's quite a big pile of, you know what? It's quite a big pile. And remember, we're talking about an egg cup here. So, we've got a problem. There's another way to look at it, and it's like this. And I'll just acknowledge here, this data comes from Brent Cook and ESR. Cattle go to the toilet, or believe it or not, it's an interesting fact, 9 to 16 times a day, on average about 12. And when they go to the toilet, they do about 2 kilograms of cow fat. So that's about 25 kilograms per cow. 9 million cattle in New Zealand. That comes out to about 230,000 tonnes of fecal material a day, 84 million tonnes per year. So that's a lot of, you know what. So there's two really contrasting things going on here. Here's another thing that's important, that is, why is it important? Well, look at the UN Sustainable Goal of Development number 6. And it says we're trying to ensure access to water and sanitation for what's that? Oops. Fine, keep going. That's, sanitation is the use of toilets, because we're trying to prevent open defecation. Why do you want to prevent open defecation, what we call open defecation? Because it puts feces into the environment, and from the environment it can easily get into drinking water supply. But here we are, we've got open defecation. 500 million animals, or equivalent to 500 million people, open defecation. Now, I'm not suggesting we start installing toilets for cattle and sheep, don't get me wrong. I'm just trying to point out the problem. Because a couple of questions come to mind, and that is it the same? Is animal feces the same as human feces in terms of health? Is it the same? And does it make people sick? Well, here we go to the inquiry, what are they saying? A whole lot of evidence there, and they're talking about somewhere between 18,000 and 100,000 cases of illness in New Zealand attributed to drinking water supply. Now, I don't know what that number is, I've got no idea what that number is, somewhere between there. But the thing that's interesting to me is, firstly, it's all preventable disease, it shouldn't be happening, whatever the number is. And the second is that those cases are not outbreaks. They're not events. Most of those cases are sporadic illness. They occur a couple over here today, one over here tomorrow, another one over there next week, which is quite a different beast from an outbreak. And so, the burden of disease, in terms of water supply, is really important, and it's related to a whole lot of factors, some of which I've just covered. So very quickly, and I'm not going to go over this in much detail, what are the contaminants that make people sick? And you've probably heard a lot about this. We've got these 4 groups of microbiological contaminants. I want to start with bacteria. I don't want to say a lot about it, except a couple of things. And to mention that, firstly, we've got this animal or human fecal source. And that's where our Campylobacter, when it makes people sick, comes from. Bacteria are controlled by chlorine and inactivated by UV, which is slightly different from being cooled. And they're removed by some types of filters. So we can put a barrier in place to control them. And they're tiny. They are really, really tiny. That's why you can have so many on 1 gram of feces, because they are so tiny. And they do cause disease, and particularly in New Zealand they cause campylobacteriosis. So here's a graph of the cases of campylobacteriosis in New Zealand over a 10-year period. And we just need to acknowledge Nigel French from Massey University for all of the graphs I'm going to show. And I put this graph up for one particular reason, and that is, I can get this pointer going, this point here. Because what this graph shows is you can change the outcome of illness. You can intervene and change the outcome of the number of cases of illness we have. So what happened in New Zealand here was we had these, by world standards, some of the highest Campylobacter rates you've ever seen anywhere in the world. And a program was introduced around poultry and interventions around poultry. Poultry are a big source of Campylobacter. And it changed this graph and these statistics significantly. So 50% decline in notifications were a $50 to $70 million cost saving. So the point I'm making here is if you do stuff, you can change stuff with waterborne disease. It does work. And not all these cases are waterborne. I'm not saying that. There's a percentage that are waterborne. But intervention does work. And here's the thing. Water supply is a health intervention. That's why we do it. We do water supply to stop people getting sick. Water supply is a health intervention. I think Marcus made that really clear yesterday. So it's not always working, right? Because, and here's where we can have an intervention, we're having regular Campylobacter outbreaks in New Zealand. We've got a proud history of Campylobacter outbreaks. And my point is that if we do intervene, we can stop this. I want to talk briefly about a particular bacteria that's important. It's this little guy called E. coli. Fantastic little guy. Really important in water supply because it's present in the gut of a mammal in enormous numbers. And so if you find it in a water supply, we say that it's present, then we can expect other organisms, pathogens, things that make you sick, to also be present. See, E. coli doesn't make you sick, because if it did, we will be sick all the time, because it's inside of us in enormous numbers. And the other thing we say is, if we don't find it, then the water's safe to drink. So it's called an indicator organism, and we test for E. coli and drinking water standards. I'm going to come back to this. Because I think there's a little more to that story than what we see. And I said E. coli doesn't make you sick, but there's actually one little guy, well, there's a number of them actually, that do cause illness. A thing called E. coli 0157. And it wasn't present in New Zealand. It causes a terrible illness and been responsible for deaths in some places, relevant to water supply, contaminates water supply. Has this virulence gene, and some people who get ill with this particular little bug, they end up with kidney failure, and it can be very serious and fatal. So, while we say E. coli is not a problem, it doesn't make you sick, there are some virulent strains that do. And we see them in New Zealand. And so here we go, in New Zealand, first case 1993, and I was involved working in public health in Auckland and investigating some of these first cases. Turned up, unheard of in the 70s and 80s. Turns up. And what you can see here is we're getting an increasing number of cases. E. coli 0157 is associated particularly with cattle, and believe it or not, cattle feces. So, you can see here a clear link between increasing numbers of cattle and increasing disease burden. There is a really important link here between what's going on in the agricultural sector and what's happening with our health. Very quickly about protozoa, because these guys are quite different from bacteria. Much bigger, but still really small. And have this interesting life cycle where in the environment they turn into a little golf ball-like cyst or oocyst that's just genetic material. And they just stay in that state and they wait and wait and wait and wait. They can handle quite difficult environmental conditions. And then when they're ingested into a mammal, they turn into a trophozoite, woohoo, party time, and they start going crazy and multiply. So, protozoa are associated with what? You guessed it, cattle. Strongly associated with other animals as well, but particularly with cattle and calves. And so, if you look at rates of cryptosporidiosis in New Zealand, you find that New Zealand has very high rates of two protozoan illnesses, cryptosporidiosis and giardiasis. And as I said, where do these organisms come from? Now, it's not all waterborne. Don't get me wrong, it's not all waterborne, but a percentage of it is. In fact, it has this really interesting seasonal pattern. And so you can see here, it increases at a particular time every year. What's that time? Springtime, calving time. Lots of calves, lots of infected calves, lots of people handling animals, lots more effluent on the ground, rainy weather, all the things come together. So we have this pretty clear link between disease burden and animals in our environment. And you see it here pretty clearly. So 2 species of Cryptosporidium hominis, you find it associated here in the blue with swimming pool infections. So swimming pools are quite good environments for the transmission of cryptosporidiosis, and I've investigated quite a number of outbreaks associated with swimming pools, and my advice to you, if you go swimming, and I do, is just keep your mouth shut. Go to the pool, just keep your mouth shut. The hardest thing to stop in its tracks in terms of public health outbreak is a swimming pool related outbreak of cryptosporidiosis. Because kids get it, they think they're better, they go along to the pool and oops, it wasn't much, but remember, just an egg cup. Some other kids swim along, oh, this is great, blah, blah, blah. Next kid's infected, they're on 2 days, they come back. And so you get these whole classes, whole schools of kids off sick, cryptosporidiosis. The important point here though is that Cryptosporidium parva associated with cattle and sheep, this is where your peak is. So you see different species associated with different hosts and different activities. I want to talk very briefly about viruses, because I think that while we know a lot about bacteria and bacterial pathogens, and a lot about Cryptosporidium and protozoan pathogens, we don't know quite as much about viruses, and it's really changing. So really tiny, and the key thing is they are not living organisms. They are not living organisms. They're just little bits of genetic material, and they wait till they find a host, and then they inject that material into the host, and the host doesn't work, it produces a whole lot more viruses for them. The host is the cell. But I suspect that a lot of our sporadic illness, our sporadic disease burden, is actually to do with viruses. There's a bunch of reasons that I think that. And one of them is that we found out relatively recently that what we used to think about the survival rates of viruses, so survival is not the right word because they're not living. So I can't say they're surviving because they're not a living organism. What we do know about the viability rates of viruses in the environment is it's way longer than what we would have thought. And when we wrote, and I was involved with this, the 2000 Drinking Water Standard, we said you can have groundwater, it's been underground for 12 months, everything in it will be dead or not viable. And you can use that water without treatment. Now we know now that viruses, many viruses, will survive in groundwater in the environment for up to 2 years and some even more. So this changing understanding, this changing science is allowing us to rethink a lot of the things that we need to do in the way we think about them. So I would predict that viruses are of increasing importance to us. So I'm going to go back to my question, what does it say? Here's what it was saying. Well, here's the thing. The thing about viruses is they're human specific. So cattle don't have viruses that can make us sick. Cattle might have viruses that make cattle sick. But viruses are human specific. So you only contract a virus from human fecal source. You can get bacteria, protozoa, and viruses from the human fecal source. Cattle, cows, and sheep are only going to get these bacteria and these protozoa. So there's a difference already. And if you're comparing the feces from animals, you've got to exclude that particular pathogen group. Now, the other difference is this. Pathogenic bacteria, protozoa, and viruses are only shed from a human who's infected and unwell. And they might not be unwell, but they'll certainly be infected. Bacteria and protozoa that can make us sick are whether cattle, cows, and sheep, whether they're well or not. And so the numbers in the feces, the numbers of pathogenic organisms in the feces of these guys is going to be way higher than in these guys, in other words, in human sewage. So there is a difference. There is a difference. And the other difference is in these organisms themselves. So bacteria, you can control them with UV and chlorine. Protozoa only with UV, not with chlorine. And viruses only with chlorine. So if you are thinking about a water treatment system and what kind of water treatment system you're going to have, you need to have a think about what are the organisms that are going to be in the source water that we use. I just want to speak also very briefly about this guy E. coli on the basis of what I've just said. As I said, it was an indicator organism, and if we find it present, we assume that the pathogens are present. And if we find it's not there, we assume that the pathogens are not present. I've been becoming increasingly uncomfortable about that idea. Now that idea in itself is one of the foundations of demonstrating water safety. But it's got some real problems for me. And the problems are in the assumptions. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should not test for E. coli. What I'm saying is we need to have a really clear understanding about the limits of testing for E. coli. So first up, you get a positive result. Make an assumption. If it's positive for E. coli, that indicates fecal contamination. We can assume that there's likely to be the presence of pathogens like Campylobacter, etc., etc. Fair enough. You get a negative result. What are your assumptions about that negative result? Well, first up, it takes 12 to 24 hours to get a result for E. coli. So first up, water that was contaminated is gone. That's long gone. People have been drinking that. The second thing is, if you do an E. coli test once a week on a Tuesday, we assume that if you do another test on the following Tuesday, we assume, and our standards assume this, that if you did a test on the in-between days, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, you'd have got the same result. But we know that the inquiry was very clear. Water supply contamination can be intermittent. It can be intermittent. And it can be associated with weather events. It's going to rain a whole lot. If it rains on Saturday, take the test on Tuesday. So there's some assumptions there. But probably even more important is this. We're assuming we get a negative result that protozoa aren't present. We're saying, water safety drink. We've got a zero E. coli. Well, hang on, protozoa are really different to E. coli. They have a very different survival characteristics. And there's no correlation between finding and levels of E. coli and protozoa like Cryptosporidium. When you look at viruses, E. coli actually doesn't survive long in the environment. And I've just told you that viruses can last up to 2 years or more. So if we are finding no E. coli, I'm not confident that we can say there's no viruses there. Or that we can say there's no protozoa there. And that's why I'm becoming increasingly uncomfortable about this. So what do you do? What do you do? And there's a bunch of things you can do. And I'm not saying, as I said before, don't test for E. coli. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is understand it. Because I often see and hear, there's been an incident, someone's on TV and they're saying, yeah, we've had this problem, but we've done 3 tests for E. coli and they've all come back negative, so the water's safe. And when I see that, and you'll be surprised how often you see it, I think it's a reflection more of a lack of understanding about the limitations of E. coli testing than about safe water supply. So what do you do? And I'm a huge fan of risk management. Those who know, who've heard me speaking, know me will know that that's the case. Risk management, I believe, is a fantastically useful tool for us to solve or manage this E. coli testing conundrum. The problem is that in New Zealand, we don't really do a lot of risk management in water supplies, and what we do, we don't do it well, in my view. And we particularly don't do a lot of risk management work around water sources and water catchments. So if you look at our drinking water standards, it says one section there about doing a catchment risk assessment. Do a catchment risk assessment. Well, it's not a catchment risk assessment. It's actually an assessment to determine the level of treatment for protozoa that is required. It's called a catchment risk assessment, but it's not that. It's something like that. And it's a very crude measure. It's a very coarse way to do that. And we have legislation that says you've got to prepare a water safety plan. Now, our water safety plans, as we prepare them, focus mostly on water treatment processes. They don't focus a lot on water sources and water catchments. And they're quite cursory. They're quite cursory in their treatment of risk in a water-supply catchment. And we actually saw that with the Havelock event. So my view is that one of the things we need to do in New Zealand is rethink this idea of catchment risk, source water risk, and what we need to be doing about it. Because if you look at most other jurisdictions, you find they do. Many other countries. So here, for example, British Columbia, I was over there last week at a conference, and here's a thing that's interestingly called a GARP. And a GARP is a groundwater assessment for risk of pathogens. So what they do is they say, well, is there a big pile of that stuff I was talking about before up there? Is there septic tanks? Is there human viruses? And they use that information to have a big impact on what they do with their treatment systems. But they start up there. In New Zealand around risk, we tend to focus straight away on the treatment point. Very quickly, cyanobacteria, quite a big problem as well, increasingly a problem in New Zealand, blue-green algae, and a really important problem. I want to talk though, I want to stop talking about animal feces, and you're probably tired of listening to me talk about it. Personally, I find it fascinating. My therapist is probably on a little program to try and solve that problem. I'm doing quite well. I want to talk about nitrogen because I've got a different take on it. We've heard people talk about nitrogen, we hear about nitrogen, we hear about it a lot. I have a slightly different take on it. And I don't take anything away of what people said, it's all true. Nitrogen is generally considered to be a problem for the environment. It's actually a problem for human health as well. We often don't think about that. And particularly, it's very toxic to fish, etc. But there's this thing called blue baby syndrome. You might have heard about it. Actually, there's a whole lot of causes of blue baby syndrome. In the water industry, we tend to think it's just nitrogen in the water supply. There's a whole lot of them. But what happens here is a curious process that, because nitrate is biologically inert, and when children consume water with nitrate in it, and infants, the actual microflora in their gut converts it to nitrate. So it turns nitrate to nitrite. And the nitrite then converts the hemoglobin into methemoglobin. And the methemoglobin blocks the uptake of oxygen in the blood. So it's a very serious problem for infants. Curiously, with adults, the nitrate gets absorbed before it gets to the gut, so it never gets converted into nitrite. And we don't have this problem. It's one that's specific to young children. What I would say about it though is that the work that was done on this determine our levels of the maximum sector values was done in the 1940s by Dr. Cohen. And it is quite contested. It is quite contested, the work that he did in those levels. So the point that I'm making here is really that there's a whole lot of stuff we do know. There's a whole lot of stuff we don't know. And there's a whole lot of stuff that we argue about and discuss and contest to do with human health. So I'm going to flick through and miss the last bit of, due to time, the last bit of what I wanted to talk about, which was emerging contaminants. I'll talk about that another day. I just want to talk about these quick take-home messages from today. Something for you to think about. And the first is that understand that waterborne pathogens are highly prevalent in livestock in New Zealand. And so they're highly prevalent in our environment. Large quantities. And surface waters frequently are contaminated with animal and bird associated pathogens. Now, I don't subscribe to this idea that you get rid of all the sheep and all the cows in New Zealand and you can drink water anywhere. I simply don't subscribe to that. And the reason being that these things we're talking about, they're natural things. Bacteria, protozoa, viruses, they're natural things. And they're present in our native flora, our native birds, and lizards, and all sorts of things. So getting rid of cows and sheep isn't going to get rid of them, but the presence of large numbers of cows and sheep in New Zealand means that the quantity of these things and the availability of these things is very, very high. So there's a clear link between human and animal feces and human illness, and water is definitely a pathway. There are a number of emerging contaminants. I didn't really get to that. So there's a bit of a take on health and water and those links, and the impact that things that are in our environment have on health and water supply and the burden of disease and how long that works. So thank you very much, and I'm going to stop right there.
Thank you, Jim. Look, that was absolutely compelling presentation in terms of some of the functions sitting behind human intervention in terms of a natural environment. Such interesting. Has anybody got a question for Jim? Burning question. Yes.
Hello, Jim. From the Brewery District Council. We have 14 rural schemes. One of those stems from taking wood from a shallow gallery bore, and we're running it 300 kilometres through rural property. So a lot of that is probably underneath 58 million tonnes of that shit you're talking about. We have a real problem when it comes to managing that distribution. So we took our council took the decision a long time ago to fluoride supplies. But as you mentioned now, we've got a real risk with protozoa. So on an aged infrastructure across that 250 kilometres, we've probably got 40% of it still what's in the 60s. So we're fixing this stuff on a regular basis. We've got chlorine in the water that deals with potentially to the viruses, but to the bacteria, but not to the protozoa. You got any views on that?
Yeah, I do, and it's rural supplies in New Zealand are a real problem. They are a real difficult problem that we really struggle to deal with. We really struggle to deal with it. We kind of in 2008, with the legislation, the Health Drinking Review Act, we tried to deal with it there with the use of point of entry devices. No one's really taken that up, to be fair. What I say to people is this: with a water supply, any water supply, but it applies in a rural situation. The first thing you must do as a water supplier, the first thing you must do is manage risk. Forget about your compliance. First thing is manage risk. And the simplest way, and I'm pleased to hear you've done this because a lot of people have, the simplest way to manage most of your risk is to add chlorine to a water supply. Add chlorine, 4.2 milligrams per litre. That reduces the risk profile of any water supply by a huge amount. And then you can look at the other parts of it. What I would say the next thing that you need to do then is have a really good look at your catchment. Do a comprehensive catchment risk assessment. And come to a conclusion about what are the pathogens in our catchment? What are the risk pathogens that are there? And then you can make a decision about how you're going to deal with those pathogens. And if you come to the conclusion that there is protozoa in that catchment that could contaminate your water supply, you are duty bound to ensure there's a barrier to protozoa. Because if you are a water supplier, you have any water supply, even if it's a rural supply, and I know there's a whole lot of issues about what people will say about consuming that water. If you are the water supplier, you have a responsibility to protect the health of those people consuming that water. So I don't know, hopefully that answers the question. I know it's problematic. I'll be really interested to see where we go on this question. If, and I suspect we will get a new regulator.
May I just a response? We have done a risk assessment and we've checked, and there's from all the testing we have done, we don't have a protozoa issue in our catchments. Yeah, the slide came up yesterday that talks about small suppliers and how they're non-compliant with their drinking water standards. So our risk assessment would suggest that we don't need to worry about protozoa today. Yeah, if through our risk assessment we've decided that that's not an issue for us, but yet we still come up on slides to show that we're not compliant.
Right. So the first thing is, and I don't know what you've done, but the first thing I'd say is testing for protozoa is different from a risk assessment. And testing for protozoa and not finding it in a surface water catchment doesn't mean it's not there. So the risk assessment is quite different. And the risk assessment says, what's the likelihood of it being there? Is it likely to be there? So what you're talking about there is a way that the standards are written, and the standards are written in such a way that they say if you've got a surface water catchment, you must have a protozoa barrier. And that's what you're coming up with. So if you looked at the catchment and you said actually it's pristine bush and there's no cattle up there, we don't think, we've done some testing, we don't think that there's protozoa up there. What the drinking water standard says is there may not be, but there may be. And so you need to install a protozoa barrier for that reason. That's how the standards are written. One more.
Most of this appears to be aimed at service water supplies. There are about 950,000 people in New Zealand, I understand, are on unserviced water supplies, which is self-supplied, and probably about 3.5 million of our tourists each year gravitate to the rural area, which are not service supplies. What are your suggestions for solving the challenges that are inherent in that situation?
So the first thing is that, I'm sorry if I gave the impression I was only talking about surface water supplies. I'm talking about all water supplies. So a groundwater system.
I mean serviced.
Oh, services, sorry.
Network supplies.
Yeah. So you're talking about self-suppliers, household supplies.
Yeah.
Okay.
The bush hut out in the back.
Yeah. So, well, two great questions, because you've struck two of the really thorny issues here. And I guess it was kind of raised in the inquiry and not really advanced too much. But we have a problem with many local authority suppliers. We have a bigger problem with our non-local authority suppliers, and these are what we call self-suppliers. And it's a significant problem. And how do we deal with that problem? Because ultimately, those suppliers are not covered by the Health Drinking Water Amendment Act. The regulator for those self-suppliers is actually your local authority. And most local authorities, if they're aware that they're the regulator for those suppliers, they're not doing anything, even if they're aware. And many of them are not aware. So it's kind of falling through the cracks. And I guess one of the big questions that will come up with a new regulator, and I'm pretty confident and hopeful that we'll have a new regulator, is which suppliers are they going to regulate? Are they going to regulate just council supplies? Or are they going to be the regulator for all suppliers, regardless of who owns them, how big they are, whether they're a network supply or not? And if they are going to, there's been a suggestion that the new regulator should, how far down are they going to regulate those suppliers? What level of population, for example, Are we going to say we'll cut off at 150, or we'll cut off at 100, or 50? Because the lower you go in terms of that number, the more supplies you've got, the bigger your regulator's going to be. So, yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, and I think at the moment the jury's out on how we deal with it, but it's a gnarly one that really does need attention. I'll give you an example, I'll give you one quick example. Ski field, self-supplier, not covered by the Health Drinking Water Amendment Act, not the responsibility of our drinking water assessors. 5,000, 10,000 people there on a day. And for me, it doesn't make sense when they get missed out and a little community supply that a council is operating across a network boundary of 84 people is in. So yeah, big problems.
Thank you very much, Joe.